Hi everyone, the topic that we are going to do today is barriers to communication. There are multiple barriers when we talk of good communication. So we need to know that what are these barriers and how we can overcome them. Let's start talking about what actually the word barriers means. So as we know, the word barrier largely tells you about the hindrances and the obstacles that have been faced. And when I say barriers to communication, I'll say it in a way that barriers to communication are basically the obstacles or the hindrances which are faced while communicating with other person. As the barriers occur, it is difficult to get the communication done effectively, and hence then gap that is created can create multiple problems. Barriers to communication. A communication barrier is basically anything that prevents us from receiving and understanding the messages as the sender has tried to convey them to us. So anything that blocks our interpretation to the message will be termed as barrier to communication. Barriers to communication are the obstacles and hurdles in the process of communication. They make the message distorted. At times, even after taking care of a lot of things into the content of communication, these barriers do not allow to make the communication effective. There can be multiple types of barriers that an organization can largely face. To name a few, they can be language barriers, psychological barriers, sociological barriers, physical barriers, attitudinal barriers, cultural barriers, organizational structure barriers, technological and social religious barriers, perception barriers, and emotional barriers. We'll go one by them and understand each one of them. First, coming to linguistic barriers. So, as I've said, linguistic barriers are also called semantic barriers, are all those barriers which arise out of improper usage of language, vocabulary, and grammar. So, the fact that each major region has its own language, and when we are communicating interstate or inter-religion or inter-culture, then it has to be made sure that linguistic barriers do not come on the way. Talking about psychological barriers, these are basically various mental attitudes, the perceptions, the motivation levels of the people which create hindrances in effective communication. Some people have fear of speech, some people have fear of state, people have depression, and many other obstacles in terms of their own mental well-being. These can also create a problem for the organization in terms of good communication. Physical barriers includes anything which is a physical object and has caused hindrance to communication. For example, closed doors, closed cables, or uneasy or cracking voices. So all of these which creates a hindrance due to physical objects will be termed as physical barriers. Coming to attitude barriers, as I've told you earlier, also something like psychological barriers. So something that creates an ego clash between the people, and that ego does not allow the people to communicate effectively. So inconsiderate behaviors and ego clashes lead to attitude barriers. These people who face all of these issues are not able to communicate. Their personality might be very shy or very angry, people having a lot of anxiety, and these traits make them full of attitude and ego, which do not let them communicate effectively. Cultural barriers, people coming from different cultures follow different gestures, different languages, different way of talking, different actions, different colors. All of these, when merged with another culture, can create a problem if not understood effectively. Organizational structure problems. Organization has its own level and its own hierarchy. In order to maintain the good communication between the organization, it has to be ensured that the hierarchy of communication or the structure or the channel of communication is appropriately considered. If it is not, then it will lead to a lot of problems and concentrate into effective communication, as it would lead to a lot of misinformation or lack of appropriate transparency amongst the employees. Coming to sociological barriers, so, a lot of disorders and diseases also prevent effective communication to happen between the various channels of communication. Shrillness in voice, a lot of dyslexia, or any kind of such problem which relates to the physical well-being of a person may not be able to let him communicate effectively. Emotional barriers. Emotional barriers lead to get generated from the IQ of the person. So when the emotional question of the person is not very good, the person who is not very emotionally stable, who cannot let his own willpower come over his emotions, then he might face certain difficulties into communicating well with another people. His emotions would largely include anger, frustration, humor, blur decision making, instant decision making, being hyper. All of these problems might lead him not communicating effectively with the people surrounding him. Perception barriers. Perception basically means how you perceive, how you understand the words said by other people. So different people perceive things differently, right? This is a fact that must be considered while we communicate effectively, because if one communication has to happen transparent, and the communication level has to be perceived in a right way by both the parties. All the messages which are communicated should be very crisp and clear. They should not create any kind of interpretation gap, but when these gaps arise, they lead to perception barriers. Technological barriers and social religious barriers. So, as we say, technology is developing very fast, at a very very rapid rate. It has become very difficult to keep pace at the newest developments that have happened. So, at times, due to technology, also few people may be very advanced into these technologies, and while others might not be, due to which these barriers might arise. I think that's all for today's class. Next topic will be discussed in next class. Have a good day, all of you. Thank you very much.